Welcome to this training for research faculty session. My name is Lisa Barreau. I'm the Associate Vice President for Research here at USU. And I'm so happy to see all of you here today on this snowy morning. I realize many of you were probably operating your snowblower or scooping only an hour ago. So thanks for being here. We hope this is an informative session for you. And I really feel very strongly about how well positioned USU is to pursue NSF Career Awards. Jerry's going to tell you a little bit about history and about the program itself, but I just want to say I strongly encourage you to all think about this mechanism. The faculty role that we play here at USU, with its combination of teaching and research, is really ideal for the career program. And receiving one of these awards can be it's an amazing honor because it is for the elite young faculty. And so I encourage you to strongly think about it and ask questions for this. With that, I'd like to start by introducing Jerry Lynn Hansen. She's the head of our proposal development unit within the Office of Research. And so Jerry's going to tell us a little bit about the career program and USU's history with it.
Thank you, Lisa. I take notes. I'm sorry. Lots of information. So, like Lisa was mentioning, the career program, a career award is really the most prestigious award that you can get as an early faculty member, an early career researcher from NSF. So NSF is where you think you're going to get the majority of your funding. And then this is something that you really should consider. Like Lisa said, with the culture and the mission statement of USU really having a strong educational and outreach component, it does put you in a really competitive position to be successful in this program, if you keep trying. One thing that's important to remember is this is a foundation-wide activity. So there isn't a particular one place that the career program lives. It is foundation-wide. So every single division, every single directorate they participate in the career program. So it doesn't matter if you're in engineering or social sciences or chemistry or biology, you will have access to this program. Bear in mind that these are single PI projects. So it's you on your own, it's your career. I mean, it's the name of the program, career. So bear that in mind, and that it is both educational, very strong educational component as well as research. Know very well research proposals that you submit on a regular basis probably, but this has that very strong educational component that needs to be integrated. It needs to be integrated, it needs to be ambitious overall, but not too ambitious. It still needs to be feasible because you are limited by time and money, just like other research proposals that you submit. So this is from a webinar that, this is a lovely statement. It's from a webinar that NSF did last year on the career program. They do one every year. So if you're interested in getting access to that, you can actually find all the slides on the NSF website. But then, like I said, you can also participate in the live webinars when they but their statement says that the Career Award supports the early development of academic careers in which the excitement of research is enhanced by inspired teaching and the dissemination of new knowledge to a large audience. So if you know anything about NSF, you know they're very big on broader impacts, so that's your dissemination portion, very key component, again, as well as that very strong integrated educational component. You only get 3 submissions. You only get 3 tries. So plan it well. Don't think that you can just keep applying, and it isn't her idea. It's not like, well, that idea bombed, I'm not going to use it anymore. It's based on you as an investigator. So you only get 3 tries yourself. The expectations for the scope of the research and the educational activities that you need to include in your proposal varies. It varies by your disciplinary norms. So there's not one magic bullet that's going to do it across all of the divisions and directorates. You really need to be looking at your own discipline and understanding what is expected within that community. And similarly, the merit review and the award sizes also vary. So what's considered, a home run in the engineering directorate might fall flat in the education directorate. And you may get $500,000 in engineering, where perhaps in the social sciences you're only going to get $200,000. So it does vary. Bear that in mind. So programs' aims are very, very lofty. They're a lot of work, but again, they're really a feather in your cap if you can get one of these awards. So as far as USU's success, in its current incarnation, its current form, the career program made its first awards in fiscal year 1995. And USU's first award was made in 1998. So we were right there when that program started. And then to date, I just pulled a report from the NSF website on Friday, I believe it was, and we have received 35 awards over those intervening years. And some of the 2018 cycle proposals are still pending either award notification or a decision on whether or not they can be funded. So we may increase that number as well. Over the past approximately 5 years, we are averaging about 2 to 4 career awards here at USU per year. Again, bear in mind, you may not get this on your first try. You more than likely won't get it on your first try, but don't get discouraged. Keep trying. You have 2 more tries. And most awards are actually made on that second or that third submission. So you got to stick with it. And you got to keep fine-tuning based on the review panel comments that you get back, people you talk to. I mean, just talk to everybody that you can about this and get feedback and input, and just it will help. It really will help. And as far as getting help goes, so some of the campus resources that are available to help you get one of these things out the door and funded, hopefully. Probably the most valuable resource on campus are the award winners that are here on campus. So talk to those individuals, even if they're in a different discipline than you. Just talk to them to understand their experiences, what they just tweaked a little bit and all of a sudden it worked, or some educational component, piece of the educational component that they added that was a hit with the review panel. Little things like that can really make a difference. So to find those individuals, you can do exactly what I did on Friday. Just go to the NSF website and do a search for the career awards. Or you can contact me. I'm more than happy to help get you in touch with somebody in your field, so that give you the whole list, whatever it may be to help you. We're here to help you be successful in this. And then I also have a team of college-based research development specialists that you can access as well. So I have someone in engineering for the engineering faculty, education, agriculture, science. So those individuals are here to help you be successful and get proposals done in a really timely manner, number one, but they're also a really good treasure trove of information as well. We have assisted with a large number of those awards that I mentioned that have come to campus. So we have a lot of experience in kind of helping you fine-tune things, getting you additional resources that may help you. So if you're in a college that has one of those individuals and you don't know who that is, again, contact me and I can get you in touch with those people. They're a really good resource. They can help keep you on task too. I also have I subscribe to a newsletter. It's called Research Development and Grant Writing News. And this is done by they're very experienced grant writers. They come from educational institutions, but they do regular articles on career proposals, different pieces of it, whether it's the budget or the educational component or positioning yourself, all kinds of different things. In fact, they just did one last month in January on scheduling the production of your career proposal. It's really is something that if you're going to be successful, you can't be doing it at the last minute. It's got to be really planned out, and okay, I'm going to work on this at this point in time, and then talk to this person before I can work on this. So really structuring how you develop this proposal over the months before it's due can keep you sane, and it can also help keep you on task.
Where can you find this newsletter? Do you have access to this newsletter?
Yeah, so if you want access, I have tons of editions. Send me an email, and I can get you access to it. They're all housed in the box folder, but I need to get you added to that so you can view all of those.
I'm sorry, did you already mention your email?
So my email, so again, I'm Jerry Hansen, Director of Research and Development. My email is Geraldine.Hansen, Jerilyn, .Hansen with an E-N, obviously, at usu.edu. And then, email me anytime, seriously. Anything you need, if you're looking for somebody, I can help you find them, I can help you find resources, just email. I'm here to help you. And then I mentioned earlier about the dissemination piece of this, the broader impacts that NSF requires of all proposals, including this one. Don't try to reinvent the wheel when you're thinking about this, because number one, you don't have the time, and number two, you won't have the money. So use existing resources that we have on campus. And like we've alluded to before, because of the mission statement of USU being outreach and extension, our cooperative extension group can really help you with that dissemination piece. They have lots of different ways, lots of different methods that they can help you reach out into the community, whether it's to the community at large or if you want to target kids of a certain age. They can help you get into those groups with different kinds of activities like the 4-H group and things like that. So then that's, I mean, basically, if you want to use a term for it, it's plug and play. So you contact those individuals and they'll work with you to help develop the dissemination and the outreach piece that you can then write into your proposal, and you're not trying to develop it with limited time, limited money from scratch. So that's what I've got. Any questions before I turn it back over to Lisa and the panel?
We've got one from a remote attendee here. Does the 3 submissions include from a previous institution?
It's tied to PI, right? So
I think it's tied to PI. That would be a good question to check with the NSF program officer about, just to confirm. So there's an officer typically assigned within areas for career.
Yep. And that's the other thing. I mentioned, talk to everybody that you can. If you're thinking, if you're even remotely thinking about doing a career proposal, get to be on really good terms with your program officer, because they can be very, very helpful and a good resource to bounce ideas off of. And if they know you and they know your research, they can be extremely helpful to you in this. A great resource that, a lot of times those of us based at the institution, we're not going to be able to give you the same kind of feedback or information. So, and that's true no matter who you're applying to or no matter what program, what kind of proposal you're writing. Talk to those individuals. They're there to help you, just like we're here to help you, but they're a different resource of information. So, okay.
Great. I'll just note on that point that different areas of NSF do things differently. So sometimes that program officer might be someone who deals with both regular proposals and career proposals. In some directorates, however, they have a specific person for the career application. So I encourage you to go online, very quickly figure out in your area who is the person who's going to be the best contact for career. So before I introduced our panelists, I wanted to share with you some information they gave me prior to coming here. And I'm just going to show it without names, because all of you right now are thinking about yourself. You're thinking about, I'm in year 1, I'm in year 3, I've been out of my PhD for X number of years, I've already submitted to the career program, I'm already a PI on something else. How does that affect it? Well, I want you to know the people I'm going to introduce you to in a few minutes had been at USU 1 to 4 years when they were successful with their career award. They were generally 4 to 5 years out from their PhD. Now that's going to be very field dependent. Some postdocs are going on quite long now, but of the group we have up here today, that's their data. Notice, how many times did you submit? The panelists today are going to talk to you about One person hit it on the first shot. One person went all three. Multiple have applied more than once. And so they're going to talk about how they had to revise things and take ideas and use them to revise their proposals. And finally, we're going to hear from the panelists a little bit about, yes, they were active in NSF before the career program. They'll talk to you about being a collaborator on an application. One of our panelists, I believe, also had an individual award previously. And so this is the group we're going to meet today. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists and invite them to come forward. And so our first panelist I'm introducing is Peter Howe. He's from the College of Natural Resources. Our second panelist is Sarah Null from the College of Education. No, Natural Resources. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm doing this without notes. Oh, Jerry. I always have notes. Okay. Our third panelist is Jeff Forsberg from the College of Engineering. And our fourth panelist is Zach Gompert from the College of Science. And so the way we're going to do this is I had given the panelists 3 questions, kind of big questions to put out there. So I'm going to open up one of those big questions and ask them to talk about it. And we'll shut off that light so they're not staring into there. Oh, do I need to have it for that? Yeah? No?
That's all right.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's like you're on stage, folks. But we're going to throw out a question, but this is an interactive session, folks. People who are in the room or available online, please bring your questions forward. It's a discussion meant to help us all put together better career applications. And so, with that, I'm going to start with the question on resubmission. So some of our folks had to resubmit. And so as we think about resubmitting a career application, I'm just going to walk through the panelists and let you talk about what your experience was if you had to do a resubmission. And I'll start at this end with Zach.
So I ended up resubmitting twice before I got it, so I got it on the third time in. And each time I made non-trivial changes to the proposal. There were sort of 2 things I was mostly focusing on with it. It was all based on feedback from the review panels and talking to program officers. Some might be specific to sort of my area, but others probably not so much. So one of them, the one that's more detailed and specific, I guess, is that I kept getting asked for more and more preliminary data. So they wanted more and more evidence of feasibility, that I'd done more and more of the work up front. And that's really common in biology. They want a lot of stuff before you go in. And that was, in some ways, the easy part. I just went and got the extra data they wanted and put it in next time. I did that twice. The other thing that was the bigger one that I think is the more general is the first time I submitted it, I made my attempt at integration of teaching and research, but I don't think I did a very great job of it in the sense that I really just kind of took it as more of broader impacts expanded rather than a different way of approaching a proposal. And I still had, my core research objectives laid out as core research objectives and sort of separate teaching or objectives that I then kind of folded into broader impacts. And it was mostly the research side benefiting the teaching rather than pulling both ways. So over the next 2 submissions, I did a better and better job of actually integrating them, such that by the end there weren't distinct research and teaching objectives. They were one and the same, that were just folded into each other, and that it really was flowing both ways, that the research was directly benefiting and driving the teaching, and the teaching was driving and benefiting the research in a way that was mutually beneficial. I think that was the biggest and most important thing that I learned through those resubmissions.
Jeff, you resubmitted as well.
Yeah, so I was successful on my second try. And when I got the panel summary back, it was like somebody stabbed a dagger through my heart. Because I really liked the idea for research that I had in my first proposal, but the panel just thought it was kind of incremental advances over things that I had already done. And they didn't see it as transformative or really novel. So I totally scrapped that idea and thought, well, maybe I can submit that somewhere else some other time, and totally changed my research idea, but I was able to keep some of the educational components because they actually liked some of the educational components. So even though my research idea didn't float really well, I got some really good feedback about the potential successfulness of those elements. Developed a new research idea, totally reinvented a bit of my research program, and was successful the second time around. And I think probably the most important thing for me the second time around was finding a new research idea that I was really, really excited to work on personally, because I dumped a huge amount of time into this proposal, and I never would have done that for something that I just thought might be a good idea and might be successful. Like, it was really something that I wanted to work on professionally, and I think that really helped me with the submission.
Sarah, what is your experience?
So I was successful on my third and final try. So I resubmitted it 2 times then, and like Zach, both times my proposal completely changed. I always stuck with the same idea. My first submission had my same fundamental idea, but I think I had a ton of work and I didn't really explain why the intellectual merit was behind my idea. So in the second version, I did that somewhat better, and in the third one, I really hit it. And in all my iterations, I took out work where I'd say, and I'll kind of redo this in another state, and I had at first just a ton of work, but like I said, I was not clear on the intellectual merit and how this idea would advance my field. And so getting that, verbalizing that, I think was key for my success.
And Peter, you're the person everyone wants to be. This is like walking
And then
to the lake and getting a whole round the first time, right?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to get it on the first try, but the core of the research in my proposal was actually from previous submission. It was not a career grant that was not awarded. So I was able to take that, which went to actually a different program, the Coupled Natural Human Systems program, and adapt it to the Geography and Spatial Sciences program, which is my core discipline. And at the same time include another major research objective in geovisualization that wasn't in the original proposal, which I think a lot of the reviewers really got sold on. It was able to allow me to integrate education much better into the research itself. So
That integration is so important. Several of you have brought that up. I guess I want to touch on that some more, and please bring up questions here, because this is a fundamental part of the career proposal and how you do that teaching research integration. And so does one of you just want to start by giving us some additional comments of how you thought about it and developed it, maybe I should say?
I guess I can take a stab at that. My teaching is very loosely defined as teaching. It's teaching the general public, and so I'm pairing with an artist, and I'm having museum exhibits, and that space I work in water resources, and that's based on my feeling that the general public doesn't understand a whole lot about water resources. So I want to help educate them, so when they vote on bonds and things like that, they have more in their back pocket. And that part was always my idea, and I like that part. And I would say for your broader impacts, take a look at what you're already doing and what you like to do and build on that component. Because that was something I would take my papers and write up a 1-page blog or things. It was just a personal interest of mine to have a component of research or a component of education for the general public. And so I just built on what I already like to do.
Yeah, Jeff.
So I would say, if you're not interested in the integration of research and education, if you're not interested in the educational component costing you a lot of time and effort, then you should apply to a different program.
Yeah.
Because I've been on the same career panel at NSF twice evaluating proposals, and inevitably every single proposal says I'm going to enhance my existing classes by adding this and this and this, and that's great. You totally should do that. And then the whole panel says, well, but what's new? What's different? What's in addition to that? And so you've got to come up with some good, innovative ideas to expand beyond just the teaching that you're already doing. Sure, it's a great proposal to enhance what you're already doing, but there's got to be more. There's got to be some innovative ways to enhance that. And thinking about ways that you can get students involved with data collection, students involved with the analyses that you have to do, it's going to cost you. Because if you're thinking about, like, I want undergrads to do this work, well, you're going to have to do a huge amount of work to get undergrads to the point where they can actually do that work. But that's part of what's actually expected in these programs. And if you don't want to do that work, then you're probably going to be more successful applying to a different program at NSF than a career program.
And that just might mean a regular NSF 3-year
Sure.
award,
Yeah.
which is a possibility.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm just sitting back thinking about writing proposals. when you do this integration, how did each of you do that in the structure of your proposal? Let's think about how, is it like separate sections that you've written, or how did you structure it? Peter?
Yeah, so I think I did it the same way that Zach described, where I had my major research objectives, which took up about 10 pages or so. And within each research objective, I had a section titled Integration of Research and Education that explained how this objective was both combined research and education, rather than relegating it to a section at the end or within the broader impacts section. And I received positive review feedback about that.
Mine wasn't fairly similar to that. I had a specific section towards the beginning, kind of in the overview, that was an overall statement about integration of teaching and research that kind of laid out how it was going to work. But then, like within the objectives, there'd be like, one of the sub-objectives would be doing some sort of data analysis collection, some hypothesis, and I would talk about how I'd have students doing that, right? So it was really just, it was almost like the teaching was part of the methods to some extent of it, right? That there was, and I would explain in terms of like at the end of those objectives, in terms of expected outcomes, I have both the expected outcomes in terms of scientific knowledge gain, but also in terms of educational gains. It really was sort of all put together, and with a couple places where then I tied it in a big picture way, but really it was all one and the same.
I think some of you might have been able to link some of what you're doing in your educational part to things already going on or stuff. I think, Peter, I think you linked into the climate adaptation science program. Can you talk about tapping into something like that already exists and integrating it into your proposal?
Yeah, so that's an ongoing NRT, National Research Traineeship grant from the NSF that USU has now, that I'm senior personnel on and Sarah is a co-PI on. I think you integrated them as well.
I didn't, because mine, they got funded about the same time.
Okay.
So yeah.
But so I propose to work with some of my existing teaching that was part of that program, and integrate some modules developed based on the research in my grant into that teaching, as well as use the work with some of the students in that program to provide some of my data that I'm collecting and allow them to work with me on interdisciplinary projects that were already core parts of that existing program.
Anybody else have something I may have missed along the way? But I think about, we have to build on the resources we have that are available to us at USU. And if you can do that, for example, I'll just mention one other one for people, the Native American student program that's very active here on campus, hosting Native American students, is something that's got a lot of legs under it now because of the HHMI award. And so it's something to think about. So, yeah, Jeff.
I think from the perspective of a proposal reviewer, having seen a bunch of these proposals now, I sort of always have the perception that if there's a program that's proposed in the proposal and it's building on an existing program that already has separate support and funding and traction, that's probably going to be more successful than if one person is trying to build something completely new. Not that there's not really great ideas, and you may be starting something really new that's awesome and innovative, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can get a lot of bang for your buck trying to tack on something to something that's already going.
We have questions from the audience about this integration issue. It's so central to the career application. Yeah, Ryan.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase my question, so I'm just going to kind of spit it out. So I have undergrads working in my lab, and of course I could, wrap that in. And in fact, for my future career award, undergrads have developed most of the data that I'm going to be presenting. But I get the feel whenever I talk to someone on a career, someone who's got it, but that's not quite enough. And so I'm definitely developing my own educational aim that is actually leveraging something on campus. At some point, though, does it become too blatant that you're really screaming at the reviewers, hey, look at all this educational stuff? Or I don't know, I'm just curious what your take is.
Well, from my perspective, almost all of my educational components are focused on it.
Okay.
I hired one PhD student because that's what my budget would actually allow, and I think that's sort of expected. I think the panel will probably expect that you're going to do something to enhance your teaching, but almost all of the additional activities that I proposed were focused on undergrads. And you can get a lot of really great work out of undergrads. It costs you, but you can get really great stuff out of it.
Talk about that cost, Jeff.
Well, let's call it a startup cost. They're smart kids, right? They just don't have the technical skill set starting out to do the things that they need to do. So you have to invest to get them to a point where they can.
I guess the question that I have is would it be wise to address that in the application? I can envision saying, this is how I'm going to get my undergrads from freshman level, I know nothing about biochemistry, to purifying protein, which is what I need them to be able to do. Talking about their training program in the application, is that wise to take the time
Yeah.
to do it?
Yes.
It makes you more credible.
Okay.
Because you actually have a way to get from point A to point B.
And you're addressing our student
And
population.
that's already happening. So for me, it's just simply getting it on the paper. This is how I get a freshman to a point that I trust them with, an independent project. The
And
other thing that we
focus on
have is-
them too, because what are they getting out of this? They're getting training, they're getting exposure, they're getting that's the next generation of people that are potentially going to be graduate students and researchers and professionals. So focus on what they're getting too.
And I guess I would just shout out to anyone who's not aware, the mini grant in College of Science and the ERCO is something that we've leveraged. And that really, what I've seen, that's when an undergrad transitions from kind of a mobile paperweight to being able to be productive, because they have to take the time to think and write and get feedback. And even if they don't get the funding, they transition. So and I think that's what you're also saying, leverage, make sure that the panel's aware of these funding mechanisms. Okay, thanks.
We have another question. Yeah, related to that, did you include your undergrads in your budget, or did you just say, USU has these programs like ERCO and apply for REU?
Yes, absolutely. I have specific funding for undergraduate student support in my budget.
I did too.
So do I.
And I did a lot of mine through course-based undergraduate experiences. So I do have undergraduate researchers as part of it too. The bulk of it is tapping into each of the courses I teach to have the data collection happen through the course itself. And then you can also bring in money, funding to course fees, and then it wasn't as much you just need for paying the students participating in it as part of the coursework.
So I started this whole thing with, I think, the wrong impression when we were talking about integrating teaching, and that question was really helpful for me. So I'm just thinking, so in my lab, I get undergraduates to do a lot of research assistant stuff, and I could certainly write about that. But I was imagining that you were talking about sort of, that your actual research that you were working on was in some way going to be perfectly suited to somehow bringing into the classroom or something like that. So I guess my question is, if you have like a really active undergraduate research training program where you've got lots of undergraduates for 3 years in your lab and they do their honors thesis with you and they're publishing, is that sort of like enough to fulfill a role, or what would you do in addition? And you had mentioned bringing stuff into your courses, and I guess I'm curious about that.
I'd be skeptical of only having it through undergraduate researchers. I mean, there might be some panels where that would be sufficient, but I don't think I would take that as a general approach to doing things. I don't think it apply across the board, at least. And for mine, the way I made it work in the classes is identify, and so I have 3 classes that I focus on. One that's an intro bio class, so freshman, sophomore, one that's more like junior, senior, and then one that's a grad class. And each of those has a different thing they're doing that's suited to the students at that level. And in each case, I find something where there's an actual benefit in having many hands involved, basically. So as an example, for the intro students, I do one of the intro labs, we're designing a multi-week introductory lab. It's essentially where they're doing a bunch of little pilot experiments for me, and where they have some flexibility in those. And I don't necessarily need any one of those experiments to go well. I'm using it to generate ideas that I can then test for real once. So basically, they're just shooting out little fingers, feelers, like, does this work, this work? And then I can take the one that works best and go with it, right? So it's finding things where at that level, that's what they can do. Whereas for the grad students, they're generating the genomic data we need for the project. So it's different things for different levels of students.
I think what Zach mentioned is really important, having in some way your education or teaching component feed into your research and your research feed into your teaching, so that they're not completely separate. So reviewers can read a proposal and see exactly how they're linked, and that each is dependent on the other.
And then having the teaching really actually is, so it really is benefiting the research. It's not this thing like, I could have done this with my grad students instead, but I'm going to do it this way. I think showing why this is actually the right way to generate this kind of data to push this part of the research forward. And again, I think thinking of cases where the technical threshold is low for that work, but where having many individuals involved is critical. are cases where it works really well.
So I was at the airport at 3 in the morning last night, so I'm not, I don't know probably, but okay, so you're not talking though about you're integrating this into like a 10-10 course. Like this is upper level undergraduates.
No, across the board. So I have some that is like 10-10 course.
And so are they lab courses? Like
the lab component of the
lab component course. So really the fundamental thing here is that your students are helping you generate the data for this research project.
And they're learning by doing so, right?
Okay.
That's part of their educational experience.
So I just submit different proposal to myself, another career. Then one of my collaborators put one PhD students, 2 undergraduate students into the program. Then the review comments came, said, no, I think the 2 undergraduates can take over this project. So then we have nowhere to argue with them.
So this is your question is about the feasibility of completing the proposed work, having undergraduates integrated into it. So let's talk about that.
I would address that by saying you need to propose work that's appropriate. If you're going to support undergrads, then you have to propose work that undergrads can actually do. You have to be credible, right? And your career proposal idea may not necessarily be the most cutting edge, the most advanced idea that you actually have in your brain right now. It may be the one that's easiest to sell with an integrated research and education program that's going to be successful. And there's a cost to that too.
So you all mentioned cost. So I'm
Yeah.
just curious how you mean that.
So I'm like 3 years into my career award. And I'm mentioning this cost just because Jerry Lynn mentioned these are individual proposals, right? So, and it's a 5-year award. For me, it was a 5-year award. And that means your 1 to 2 months of salary for 5 years. And let's say you're getting 9 months from your base appointment. That leaves you with 1 to 2 months, depending on what you decide to do for other grants. And so you've got this big, huge chunk that you're investing into this thing, and it's just you. And so that has to be something that you really want to do, because if there's 10 other ideas that you have that are really big and they're all collaborative, and you want to write those proposals, you may not want to sell all of your time to a career proposal. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's awesome.
It is awesome, but it does take up considerable time, and Jeff is right, it is on you to make it succeed.
So this is just a follow-up to that then. So the suitability of the idea to this program is basically making sure that you can sell that undergraduates can generate the data.
No.
Not, if you really, really, really want to use undergraduates, then you have to propose an idea that you can integrate undergraduates with. If you don't want to use undergraduates, you don't have to. You just need an innovative idea for integrating your research and education in a way that's appropriate for the idea that you have.
Could you just give me another example of how you might integrate education and research in a different way?
So I'll give you one example from my proposal. I proposed to do a data visualization challenge where we spent the first couple of years collecting a whole bunch of data. And I'm an engineer, and engineers tend to look at the world in a particular way. So we opened up this visualization challenge to all USU students. And we're in the middle of that right now. But mainly, it could be graduate students, could be undergraduate students, could be any USU student. They're submitting visualization ideas for how to visualize and analyze this data. And honestly, I threw this idea out there because I was like, I look at the world in a particular way, and I want to see how other people see the world, because that's going to potentially give me ideas for different directions that I can go for research. What do they get? They get the opportunity to interact with a research group and program in an advanced way to advance their visualization skills, which is what they're good at, while actually working on a research project. What do I get? I potentially get some really good ideas that I can capitalize. So it doesn't necessarily have to be I have undergrads in my lab. It's I'm sponsoring something that students are involved in that they're going to get something out of, and I'm going to get something out of collaboratively.
I think it's education in the broadest sense of the word. It can
Yeah.
mean however you want to do that. It does not need to be undergrads. Jeff brought up this point, and I would say that after being on some panels, almost everyone says, I'm going to teach this in my courses, or I'm going to have a graduate student and think beyond that. Or another one I saw in my program was, I'm going to use citizen science. And all of those are good ideas, but so many people say that. Really be specific about what is that citizen science data going to give to you? How is it going to train people? How, you know, and how many people are you going to include? How are you going to use those data? And just the more you can be specific, those were the very good proposals versus just throwing out an idea when you see it in 90% of proposals. You want to think about setting yourself apart.
Did any of you, when you were preparing your applications, read other people's abstracts to think about other ideas that were coming up for the educational side?
I did. I read most of the abstracts funded in my program over the past few years.
That might be a good place to go to just look at the program you're targeting and see what kinds of the expectations that are laid out in those abstracts.
I read them more from the research perspective. And it's already been mentioned, talk to your program manager, but it's really, really important that you pitch your idea with the particular program that you're thinking about submitting to. Because if the idea is wrong for the program, it's dead on arrival. It doesn't matter how good the proposal is.
You just get terrible reviews.
Let's talk about nuts and bolts a little bit of proposal preparation. You guys are all successful career awardees now. And so for the person who's now approaching this, how would you tell them to think about the proposal development process? What kind of timeline would you have? We all know what we did, but what would be an ideal way to think about this?
For me, one of the things, I'll just start, I waited until my 3rd year here was my first try because I wanted to get my feet underneath me with teaching and getting my lab going. And then, so I wanted to wait until I had the time to put into this. That helped me get a paper out that I could cite as background work and stuff like that. And in the meantime, I thought about my idea a lot, but I waited until I had the time and mental space to really put into it. So unless you arrive, and I know people arrive, some people post off or may have worked at other universities, but wait until you can really sink yourself into it.
And I waited until my 4th year to apply. I thought about applying my 3rd year, but I dedicated several weeks, solid weeks, to writing the proposal itself. And I would recommend reading other proposals that have been submitted here, and I'm happy to share mine. Luckily others are as well, so feel free to just send me an email. I was really lucky to have read Sarah's proposal before I applied and was inspired by that. So that was one of the most helpful things for me.
Start early. Yeah.
Yes.
Early. You will go through many, many revisions. And a couple things that I will add to this discussion. I had lots of people read my drafts. But be careful who you ask to read your drafts, because a lot of people who are close to you will say, oh, it's pretty good. You know, I think you're going around. They're not going to tell you it's bad. So find somebody who will tell you that your proposal is bad. Find somebody who's not so close to you that they can't be critical. And I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but I actually shook some money loose from my dean's office to have an external reviewer read my proposal. So I found somebody who was way far removed from me, but close enough that I thought I could convince her to read my proposal. She got paid a little bit of money, and that was really, really valuable to me. Because it's almost like you're putting it in front of a potential panel reviewer, and then all of a sudden you get back some really critical feedback before you actually have to submit.
Some of my most helpful comments came from people I asked to read my proposal that were not in exactly that review. So they could go, you said all this, but why would you do that? Or there was just some basic questions that then I could go back, and often it was adding a sentence or two. It wasn't writing a whole lot, but I could provide a little bit more background. And that was the most helpful.
This is a big deal too, because the career panels that I've sat on,
they're
broad.
Yeah.
3 people are going to get your proposal, and the rest of the panel is potentially going to discuss it. And they may or may not be experts in the subject area that you're proposing. So you got to bring it down to a level that somebody who's reasonably technically competent can understand what you're talking about.
And leave enough time to get letters of support as well. If you're partnering with anybody, they need to include a letter of support. It's just a form letter, but it needs to be on letterhead and signed. That can take weeks or weeks to get that worked out.
We have a question coming in. Yes.
Yeah, we have a few actually.
Okay, go ahead.
How much does time since getting your PhD affect your success? Do they look less favorably on those who have, say, 10 years time span since PhD but have moved from a couple institutions?
That was never part of the discussion.
As long as you're pre-tenure, I think is all that matters.
And how much would an REU grant from NSF help contribute to a more competitive career submission?
So my feeling, and these folks can maybe agree or disagree, my feeling is that NSF likes building on what it's already done. So if they funded an REU and you can build off of it, I think it would look very good.
And then any others?
I would agree.
And then one more. What is NSF looking for with regards to the amount and type of preliminary data? Are publications like book chapters and concept papers, which are not necessarily research, of interest?
That's really program dependent.
But what would you say about, it's going to have to be pertinent to your proposal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it goes to credibility, right? Can you credibly come across as being able to do what you're proposing? If you have some preliminary data and some preliminary analysis, it's going to enhance your credibility.
Rose, or we'll go to Rose then here. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm curious about the broad impact thing. Okay, so you said that maybe I have a research proposal very specific to Utah, but academic Utah in higher education because Utah is the worst case scenario. So do you have like when you serve in the tenor, any kind of geographical kind of limitations? Let's say when you talk about integration of teaching and research, teaching involves in Utah. But you could make argument that, okay, right, we could disseminate this knowledge from here to like use online others. But there is any kind of disadvantage when you start with one location with has a lot of maybe potentially important implications for general society that anything like that?
I'd say, I have received comments before when I've had something that was focused only, a resource that was going to only be at USU, that why not make it more broadly available? And I've often done that since having comments like that, where I might have a focus here on developing something that's a real resource here, but then have an online version of it that can be disseminated more broadly, or something that builds beyond it, so that you're kind of focused, local, regional, but that you're not ignoring the rest of it.
So let's say, okay, sorry, just catch that. But what I think is that maybe, okay, I'm gonna have a plan, maybe already work with like extension people and then train the students in the regional campuses to get a collect and then something like that. So should be across the Utah. My point is that my research side is based on what's going on in Utah, make a general, knowledge for other, the place. So is it okay or just like, I just don't know what
it doesn't strike me as being a problem.
Is that a problem?
As long as you're reaching out beyond the university to some extent, I think.
I would say you might want to connect the dots for reviewers about how your research will inform other places.
Okay.
I think we had a question here.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
The first one is about the outreach plan. Is it absolutely necessary to have outreach plan, like to go to high school, to teach them about STEM majors, for example, or whether I can just focus on my, training undergrads and integrate into my college level teaching. The second question is that is the review process also memoryless for a career? Meaning that, the first review comments you get back may not reflect, the second time you submit because you get a new list of reviewers.
Don't count on a new list of reviewers. Because I was on the same panel in the same program twice, and I was assigned 2 proposals twice. And I called the program manager and I said, did you mean to send me the same proposals? And he said, yes, we do that on purpose because we want to know that in the Southland submission, they've basically done what the reviewer said that they should do. So don't count on the different reviewers to do the
But
same.
also don't count on the same reviewers either, right? It's not like
Right, yeah,
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
sure.
like, they don't happen, yeah.
I think program officers, even if it's different reviewers, if you failed to incorporate your first set of reviews, I think the program officer would not look on them.
Yeah.
Well, the challenge I face is that I incorporate this first set of reviews, but then the second time they came
Very
up different reviews.
Yeah.
That's the challenge
Tricky.
I'm
Yeah.
facing for NSF reviews.
To answer your first question, you don't have to go to high school. You don't have to have an outreach component like that. And I would say, don't propose something that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
it will probably come across as just something you tacked on that they won't take you seriously.
Or you will have 5 years in your future of doing something you don't
You
want
don't want to do.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You do need an integrated research and education plan, so focus on the things that you do actually want to do.
And this issue of having a proposal with 2 sets of reviews and they're different, I encourage you to discuss that with other people and let people read the reviews and talk with you about them. Because we all get this over time, and you have to figure out where they're trying to bump you to, basically. And so talk about it with other people, with mentors, peers, and that can sometimes be helpful. Yeah. Yes.
I don't qualify for this program, but I'm here to get information on the general NSF, particularly since you've been on one. How do you address the issue that clearly, I mean, when we were PhD students, we wanted our dissertation committee to not have read our material. It became very clear to me on an NSF grant that I presented that some of the comments and whatever were ignorant is too strong a word. They didn't read it. They clearly had not read my proposal. And I ran it through a whole bunch of people, including 2 scholars. I'm a social scientist, so I'm a duck out of water here anyway. And I had a postdoc, the first one in my school, at UNC Chapel Hill. And so I had lots of people, and then I get the comments back, and they clearly were uninformed. And is your experience, was that just one of those things that I just got a bad group? But how do you put in is dumbing down? We don't want to do that. What has been your experience having served on that to counteract that?
Two things. In my experience, when I get reviews back on a paper or on a proposal or whatever, it's almost always painful. And I often disagree with a lot of the things that are said, but I got some really good advice from somebody one time that said, just take a step back and try and understand why they made the comment that they made. Maybe it was actually that they didn't read the proposal, and that's the worst case scenario.
I sent this off to the same people that have read it, who are endowed professors making $175,000 a year and international scholars, and they said clearly these people didn't read the proposal.
I would say, based on my experience, it would be unlikely that you would get 3 assigned reviewers plus potential
I didn't say all
reviewers who didn't read the proposal. And what happens is those 3 reviewers, they review your proposal. One of them gets assigned as the primary presenter, and they give a summary of the proposal. The other 2 reviewers add their review. They talk through it. Any of the other panel members can actually review and comment at that time. And in the end, the NSF program manager says, where do you want to place this on the board? Competitive, not competitive, or I forget what the other categories. And then they have to write a panel summary that basically summarizes the reviews from the 3 written reviews that were submitted to Fastlane. That's a tricky process, because if you get really, really unlucky, and the person who is not only in charge of reading your proposal, but also the primary presenter, if they didn't get excited about your proposal, then you kind of get hosed.
So one more comment with that is.
But there's no way to. That's perfectly fine. Since this is not being recorded, it'll be tweeted out by the end of the day. Anyway.
Quote me on that.
Do you have any mechanical ways to help ensure? Is there some sort of when my students write research papers, I said, I will not grade your paper if you do not have a thesis statement that says the purpose of this study is. If they don't have it, I don't grade it. Is there something magic bullet
I wouldn't say there's one thing, but I do think some of the same stuff applies, right? It's about how you physically structure things. It's about by having informative headers, by having things, basically by having it such that if someone read it on the plane, half asleep, and then got there and was trying to remember what it was about the next morning, had 5 minutes, they could skim through it and get all the important stuff, whether it's bolded or diagrams, whatever it takes, right, to make it pop and to make it like your eyes go to things, remember things, right? And different ways to do that.
I had all 3 of my kids, they're all college graduates, 1 5/8 cap, all this. They all read it too for that same
Yeah.
purpose, which I highly recommend if you got smart kids.
I want to bring up one more question here. We were talking about giving yourselves time to get things done and things like that. One of the components of the career is also a letter that has to come from your department head. And that letter really has to document this integration again of teaching and research. So I just wanted to have you guys comment individually on how did you work with your department head on those letters to make sure it was the strongest it could be for your application?
Yeah, that's question for me.
That's your question? Okay. Zach, you want to start?
Yeah, so one, I got the department head the pretty much complete draft of the proposal a good month or so before it was due, so we had time to read it carefully and think about it. And then we met and talked about it too, and went over the things that I wanted highlighted and the things that I thought were important. We had a nice sort of half-hour discussion about it. And then he wrote the first draft of it, sent it to me, said, what do you think? What are the things I should change about it? So we had this back and forth with it before it was done. They got it to where it was doing what I thought it wanted to do. I didn't write it for him, but I definitely gave lots of input, and I think that and had plenty of time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just add to that, department heads are busy people, and chances are your department head has written one of these letters before and knows what the routine is. But I sent my department head draft of my project description, and I sent him the specific timing and language from the grant proposal guide that said that the department letter has to do this and this and this, just so he didn't have to go looking for that. He could just write the letter. I made it clear when the letter was due and what the requirements were, and then he took care of it.
Similar to both of those, I wrote my department head and I said, the letter must have these things, and I gave him the links. I also sent him a draft. I was lucky that he read my draft. We talked about it. He gave me some nice feedback on it. But then when he wrote his letter, I think he had a very good idea of what I wanted to do.
Yeah, went similarly for me. My department head gave me great feedback about a month before it was due. So he had a pretty good idea of what it was doing by that point.
One more question.
Yes.
I want you all to imagine a counterfactual. Imagine you put all this time and effort in, and you did not get the grant, did not get the career grant. Did you feel that the process, whether or not you got it or not, was meaningful? Did it contribute to your professional development, even if you hadn't gotten it?
I did. Go ahead, Zach.
No, yeah, I think so. I mean, not as much as if you had got it. But
Yeah.
I made connections in my dean's office with the proposal development specialist. That was really helpful for me. I made contacts with people. The one person that I asked to do an external review, and I had a better relationship with her. I asked colleagues to review my stuff so they had a better idea of what I was working on. So yeah, I mean, it would have been pretty, the first time around I was unsuccessful. I was pretty disappointed, but I turned that around into another submission. And even if you're not successful with the career, that doesn't mean you can't turn around and submit a career proposal as another submission to NSF for another program.
That's how I took it, to think I am developing this idea, and if I don't get a career, then I'll resubmit, and the idea is not going to die. I'm just going to resubmit it for other proposals down the line. So
it was really useful for me to have that 5-year window in the proposal to think about where my career was actually going to be going over that 5-year period. Because most grants that would apply for otherwise would be maybe 2 or 3 years at most. And then it was also useful to have those materials because I went up for tenure this year, and I have these things written up about my research and my career up to this point, so I could adapt those materials right into my tenure letter.
Any additional questions? If not, let's thank our panelists. Good luck, all of you. USU wants you to succeed in this, so please let us know in the research office how we can also be of assistance. Contact Jerry or myself. We'd be happy to talk about it.
Sarah, you were going to say something to me. I kind of got cut off.
Oh, I was
General
gonna say,
control.